Joshua dies, and comes the time, and by the way, Joshua is the first judge, the time of the judges. Who are the judges? And what do they represent for Israel? After the death of Joshua and the settlement of Israel in the Promised Land, the people of God faced the task of cultivating the land. Understand this piece, because I want you to understand this very good. Being a nomadic shepherds, they were not actually never, even in Egypt, they were not agricultural people. They were not farmers. They were shepherds. They had no knowledge of agricultural life and practices. They're coming to something totally new. They looked to the experts, the Canaanites, who inhabited the land, for guidance. You're going to ask me, weren't they supposed to expel everybody and kill everybody and get this land clear? Yes, but they didn't. They really didn't. They just lived with them. And the Canaanites, in turn, instructed them to use the help of their gods. Their life as farmers was intertwined with the worship of Baal and the Ashtaroth. They were the god and the goddess of fertility and rain. They controlled the land. They controlled the fate of the land and what crops should be, grown and all that stuff. And their worship was in temples scattered all over the land, and that include prostitution as well as, in times, human sacrifices. The Israelites did not drive the Canaanites out of the land, but lived alongside them. Breaking away from the covenant of Sinai, they began worshiping the Baal and the Ashtaroth on weekdays and kept the worship of Yahweh for the Sabbath. Said, let's figure this out. We need the gods of this land, because Yahweh apparently is not the God of the land. He's the God of the mountain. We saw him on Mount Sinai. He is not the God of the fertility of the land. This is not him. That's how they thought about it. So let's combine both of them. Weekdays, we worship Baal. Weekends, we worship Yahweh. And then you hear later in the book of Kings, Elijah screaming from the top of his head saying, until when you're going to be dancing between the two parties? If Yahweh is the Lord, then worship him. If Baal is the Lord, then worship him. Don't keep jumping from one side to another. Weekdays, weekends, and today we do the same. We worship the world on weekdays, and we come on the church on the weekend and worship our true God. So they were oppressed. When this happened, they broke the covenant with God. They were oppressed by their enemies and suffered persecution. And when they returned to God and cried for his help, God sent the judges. Here comes the judges. The judges were heroic military deliverers for about 300 years, until the united monarchy was established under King Saul. The book of Judges describes cycles of sin, the rising of enemies, and I mean by sin here apostasy, going and worshiping other gods. The rise of enemies, namely the Baal and the Ashtaroth. The rise of enemies who oppress Israel. They cry to God, who send them a judge to rally the people to fight, gather everybody. Each cycle ends with victory and a period of peace. And then they go back into the same habits, and they go into the oppression. They cry, God send them a judge, and the judge deliver them. They take a period of peace, they go again. How many times? 7 cycles. 7 cycles they go through this over 300 years. The book was attributed to Samuel as its author. The reason of writing of the book was to justify the rise of the monarchy. Samuel wrote this book as a historical book to tell you why we needed a king. How do I know that? How do I know that from the book of Judges? That whoever wrote that book, and traditionally we know it is Samuel, why did he write it? The theme of the book can be found in the verse. This is the verse. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This has happened over and over again. Every time this verse was written, it was followed by a terrible event, or terrible events. Terrible events. The reference to the absence of the king was made 3 more times. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that where there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. This is the beginning of the most horrible story in the whole Bible from beginning to end. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this verse keeps repeating. What does it mean? That every time I tell you there is a horrible event is going to happen, I remind you there was no king then. That means I'm trying to prepare you to understand why we need a king. The cycles were not written chronologically, but divided geographically: north, south, center, and west. I want to make a point about Samson because he's a Nazarite, and we spoke about Nazarites before. The strength of Samson was in his Nazarite vow. He belonged to the priests who at the beginning of the conquest carried the Ark of the Covenant and led Israel to victory in Jericho. The priests, don't just think of the priest as ritual people who does rituals in a church or in the tabernacle. They're actually the strength of the people. They're the strength of the people. So Samson, being a Nazarite belonging to the priest, he was given that strength, like in the time of Jericho. So he was himself a fortress, some very strong power. And this, I want you to look at this, and I did it, that I don't have to write the events, and it's all grouped in this map if you want to think about it. They're written in numbers. So the numbers at the beginning of the box tells you who happened first and who happened second and who happened third, not time-wise. It is how it is written in the book of Judges. By the way, the book of Judges, like I said, is not written as a timeline. It's written with geographical events. So you might have something written at the end of the book, might be the first incident in time. So don't look at the order as an order of time. So let us go and follow this with the chapters. The first story was given to us in the book of Judges is the story of Othniel, the first judge. He defeated the Canaanites at the Beer, that's up in the north by the Sea of Galilee. And he delivered Israel from Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, in a separate battle, and we don't know exactly where. It's something in the north. That's in chapter what? Judges 1 and 3. 2, we have in the south, Ehud, a great grandson of Benjamin, delivered Israel from the oppression by King Eglon of Moab. He did it single-handedly in chapter 3. And it's a very interesting story of how he went through the palace guards and all kinds of things. And he has a sword in his clothing that nobody saw. And then he killed that king who was oppressing Israel. This is the second story of Judges in chapter 3. Number 3, Samgar, and again in the south or the west. A relatively minor judge who killed 600 men with an ox goad, delivered Israel from the Philistines, again in chapter 3 and also in chapter 5. 4, Deborah, and you will hear about her, she's most famous. Deborah, a woman judge, also called a prophetess, and Barak, her military commander, she used Barak and she strengthened him and encouraged him so he can actually do this very decisive battle in the north, subdued the stubborn Canaanites led by Jabin and Sisera in a fierce battle at Kishon River. She has a very beautiful song, and people say this is the oldest song in the Bible, a very beautiful song. And I think it inspired movies like The Lord of the Rings about the river rising up and helping the good people fighting evil. The river Kishon, and she described him as rising up. Apparently there was a lot of rain and the river flooded, and the chariots of the Canaanites, they were very advanced military. They couldn't drive them because it became muddy. And this is chapter 4. Number 5, Gideon, one of my favorite persons in the Bible, in the Old Testament, a mighty man of valor. The angel came and met him by a wine press underground. And he was doing what? He was actually threshing wheat. You don't thresh wheat underground. You thresh wheat on top of the ground So the wind, a little breeze, will come and help you separate the kernels from the chaff. But he was going underground because at the time the Midianites used to wait for people to finish threshing, and they take the wheat or burn it, and they used to oppress them very much. So when the angel came and saw him doing this frustrating business of threshing wheat or barley underground, and Gideon has no one to help him, it's a very frustrating business. So the angel said to him, "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor." And Gideon answered the angel and said, "Tell me, if the Lord is with us, why is this happening to us?" And this is a question that keeps repeating all the time. When people go through hard times and they don't understand why they are going through this hard time, while God is promising to be with us, they ask the same question. If the Lord is with us, why is this happening to us? So Gideon asks for signs, and the angel tell him, go and use this feistiness, your anger, not against me, go use it against the Midianites, and God will be with you. And he said, how would I know that? And he asked for 4 signs, and God gave him 4 signs. The last of them was the dream of the Midianite soldiers of Gideon. That's number 5 in Judges 6-8. Number 6, Jephthah, one of the most tragic stories in the Bible. He's a son of a harlot, delivered Israel from the Ammonites in Judges 11 and 12. He is the one, before he went to war, vowed a rash vow, one of the rash vows, to offer to God as a burnt offering the first alive thing that comes out of his house. When he went back from the war victorious, and he had to fulfill his vow, and the first living thing that came out of his house was his own daughter. And he fulfilled what he vowed, and the daughter asked him for a month to cry and to mourn that she's going to go and die a virgin and not have children or a family. So this was Jephthah in chapter 11 and 12. And it's a story to teach us not to be very quick in making vows. Number 7. And number 7 is Samson. It's the last of the judges in this book. A man of great physical strength, but moral weakness, led Israel for 20 years. And Samson was a Nazarite, belonged to the priest. His power was in his own consecration, the vow that he had, that was made for him by his parents. He was captured by the Philistines through a woman who pushed him until he told her the secret of his power that only Israel understood. The Israelites understood his power, where it's coming from, because of his consecration as a Nazarite. But the Philistines didn't. They don't understand it. So when he gave the secret, by the way, it's something very important. So he was he was in sin. He was living in sin, but yet his vow was kept. His vow was kept. But then when he abandoned his vow and gave the secret of his vow, all his power was gone. And maybe that was the best thing to happen to him, so that actually he can actually return to himself. Samson called on God and prevailed over the enemy. When he destroyed the pagan temple in this city, Samson died with many of the Philistines when the building collapsed. That's Judges 13-16. These are the judges, and they are divided by chapters. And I think it's a good map so that you understand where each of them was, and where they belong in the Bible too from the chapters. Okay. Now we move to before we go over to, I want to just say something about the book of Judges. At the end of the book of Judges, you have the tribe of Benjamin completely lost. We get in a period where even judges are not existent. We don't hear anything about them. But the tribe was protective of one town who completely turned into violence and sexual immorality, to the extent of demanding to have a man to lay with a man. And as it happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, it was more violence than sexuality. It's more a crime of violence. So they took the man, and they wanted to have the man, and the man said, take my concubine, and they killed the concubine, doing whatever they pleased with her. You abused her the whole night, and she died. So the man, the Levite, took that dead body, cut it into 12 pieces, sent it everywhere to the tribes, and they gather together. They make a fight against the Benjaminites, and they completely killed all the men of Benjamin except 200. And then when they found that they're almost kind of annihilating the tribe, they said, "Stop! We don't want to kill everybody. Let those 200 hide. We are not going to go after them." They hid, and then later they made a trick to get them to have wives and to restart the tribe of Benjamin. Yes.
How can Samson live in sin yet keep his vow?
That is because we think of this today also, because it is not for him. That vow is not his personal commitment to God. So let us say today there's a deacon or a priest who lives in sin. Does that cancel his priesthood? It doesn't. When the people, they might be scandalized. They say, "What am I taking from the priest? Is this the body of Christ?" This was actually happened on history. Is it still the body of Christ? Yes, it is. It doesn't really cancel his dedication. Unless the church says you're no more, you're canceled. But as long as, and he doesn't really get reordained again if he's reinstated. So that doesn't cancel the gift. But what cancels the gift is that he will be defrocked, and by him cutting his hair, he ended his time of consecration. It's finished. So he became a very regular person. So I hope that we understand this. Is the difference between the personal accountability of the servant and his service as a gift, his office. Now we move to the next book, which is Ruth. It's 4 chapters, and I want to just make sure that we write here. It is 16 chapters. Is it 16, right? Huh? 21? Okay. But the Judges ends by the 16 with Samson. Then it starts the bad events at the end. Okay.